In Jewish mysticism, there is a phase of Genesis called Tzimtzum. According to the Kabbalists, in order to give the world life, in order to effect creation, God must depart from the world God created. The Creator must always exile God's self from the creation for the creation to breathe. God contracts to make space so that the world can exist. But right before the departure, God stuffs divine light into vessels that will be left behind. The vessels cannot contain God's light, and they burst, and shards of light are scattered everywhere. Gershom Scholem explains that we spend our lives collecting the offspring of this light. We spend our lives trying to make what once was broken whole again. This, according to the Kabbalists, begins the history of trauma. How will we pick up the pieces of our country? Where do we begin? A memory. I was 4 years old, and an African dance troupe were invited to play the worship service of my church, the Third Unitarian Church of Chicago. After the service, we all gathered in the Robeson Room, the social hall of this very serious humanist congregation full of human rights advocates on Chicago's west side. The drummers, with their djembes, offered a beat, the sound bouncing off concrete floors. Adults gathered in a crowd, and I, at 4 years old, I felt the rhythm in my limbs, in my body. My heart's beat seemed to join the djembes and the bongos, and I leapt into the crowd, shimmying my body and jumping precisely to the beat. The crowd around me grew. The space grew until the huddled crowd expanded, and suddenly a circle formed around me. I threw my body into this space and spun around, feeling the waves of energy, those smiles beaming down on me. I skipped and leapt, clapped and stomped to the beat while the circle of friendly faces clapped for me, joining with the drum until I lost myself. I forgot where I began and where the beat ended, all my energy carried away on a rhythm of power and history and community. For years and years after, even these days, people in that church remember me as the little girl who danced in the social hall and got everyone else to dance too. And I think it's worth noting that my very first experience of joy happened in my church social hall. It wasn't just the connection to a new rhythm from another land. It was the circle where I felt so at home, so well known, and in that moment, completely and totally loved. So, every time I dedicate a child or write something about a Building a New Way Together campaign, every time I officiate a memorial service or recruit a volunteer, the joy of that first moment whispers at the edge of this ministry. Sometimes it is so powerful and so present, I think you can feel it. Almost like you were there. Maybe you were in the crowd, or maybe you were one of the drummers bringing the rhythm and the life. Maybe you were a member of the congregation delighting in the child who invited you to know joy. Like the writer, Zadie Smith, I come by pleasure easily and often. I really like to make every single meal special, even snacks. I can spend weeks looking forward to a fun dinner out. A fabulous playlist, well, that can bless my whole day. And lately, dance parties before bedtime have taken on a particular euphoria and creativity in our house as my children explore their bodies, moving through space with proud abandon. But how many times in my life have I truly accessed, blissed off, thunderstruck joy? Joy, delight, and pleasure, well, they're all connected, no doubt. Joy derives from faith, not in perpetual goodness, nor perpetual progress, but in meaning, in finding meaning and deep connection. Joy is connected to faithfulness, reminding us that love is possible, that life, no matter how difficult, well, it contains joy too. Not every moment, not every day, not even every year, but it will come again. This is a life stance I'm talking about, choosing to stay attentive to joy, to wait its coming and perhaps even fear it a little bit too. Because the other side of joy can hold deep loss, even terror. Zadie Smith discusses how children are a particular terrible joy when she writes, "Sometimes joy multiplies itself dangerously. Children, the infamous example. Isn't it bad enough that the beloved with whom you have experienced genuine joy will eventually be lost to you? Why add to this nightmare the child whose loss, if it ever happened, would mean nothing less than your total annihilation?" And I want to ask you to really think through this question. What is the source of your joy? Is it faith in God or in goodness or in joy itself? That joy will return, that joy can be a reservoir, a fount of blessing for you, as it has been. Why do we speak of joy in times of infinite sorrow and struggle? The theology of liberation is built upon a theology that joy, an idea that joy awaits us all, that joy is accessible to all of us, that even under incredible oppression and subjugation, there is an interior life that can know delight, that can feel connected with God or with faith or with love, with joy. That there is an ultimate destiny that is more joyful than the days we are living through right now. As the poet and essayist Ross Gay puts it, "It is joy by which the labor that will make the life I want possible. It is joy by which the labor that will make the life I want possible." So it is not at all puzzling to me that joy is possible in the midst of great difficulty. The joy of laboring with love that will make the life I want possible. Joy in the good work of justice. It's the memory of joy which can deepen into trust that you will know joy again. The trick is to keep a little foothold on the joy you have found at some other time in your life maybe, and let it carry you forward. Let it lift you up into the next rung. Joy can leave a residue, reminding you that you were once in joy. Being in joy, well, it's a place you can return to, like a lightning strike in your life that crackles with energy and keeps it all a little bit electric. These last few years, they have felt heavier than any other time in my life. It has been a labored discipline not to greet each day, each news cycle with deeper dread than the day before. Some days have just felt like sheer terror to wake up in America. And yet, these were also the years my twins were babies and toddlers. These were also the days they learned to walk, talk, and sing. These were the days when I first saw Hamilton with my tween niece and nephew eating lemon cake together while fireworks exploded over the beach at sunset outside the window. These were also the days I took my children to see the lights at the botanical garden, and we sat for hours on the bridge sipping hot chocolate as they learned about classical music alongside botany and the twinkling marvel of a light show, all at the same time. And to this day, they request classical music with their breakfast. Sometimes I even worry my children will spend their lives seeking out the epic experience, but then I remember that life is hard. And I don't worry about the extreme sensation, the release of pure joy from time to time. Poet Ross Gay reminds us to gather what we need to put the pieces of our country back together. He writes, I often think the gap in our speaking about and speaking for justice or working for justice is that we forget to advocate for love, for what we find beautiful and necessary. We are good at fighting, sure, but imagining and holding in one's imagination what is wonderful, what is to be adored and preserved and exalted, well, that is harder for us. That's from Ross Gay. And now we are entering the darkest days of the year. This is a time when, like the seed, we need to be somewhat dormant and still, resting as we determine our next move. A time to burrow in as the pandemic rages around us. It may also be a time to release dreams of spending vacation with family or traveling. It may be a time to burrow in further and stay home, stay safe. But we can draw on our memories of joy, of Thanksgivings past and Thanksgivings in the future, to remember and to ultimately imagine and dream of what we are fighting for, what we are working for, what we are staying home for. And it is also true. There are forces that wish to strip us of joy. Yeah, we may be finding our way back to pleasure. That's clear. I've heard it from you. The delicious home-cooked meal, the festive bonfire. Pleasure, sure. But what of joy? You know, sometimes I do fear we have fallen out of joy. So, when I heard the news about who would become our next president, although I was home alone, although I had the entire sermon ahead of me unwritten and it was Saturday, I grabbed my yard signs, I stood on my lawn, and I just started yelling. I whooped and hollered. For 2 straight hours, I jumped up and down. Slowly, neighbors came out of their homes one by one, and after 8 months of quarantine apart, we had a little distanced block party. Block parties, by the way, are another memory of complete and utter joy from my childhood. One man burst out of his house and came running out with a sign that just read a single word, yes. When you feel joy creeping back in, do not temper it with cynical conclusions. Do not fall for the media's desire to keep you in anxious curiosity about how horrific things can still become. Hold up your little sign to the broken pieces of our world, one that offers a simple exultation. Yes. In 2002, an academic's article for the Journal of Southern History titled "The Pleasures of Resistance: Enslaved Women and Body Politics in the Plantation South from 1830 to 1861. This was written by American feminist historian Stephanie Camp, who writes, just as exploitation, containment, and punishment of the body were political acts, so too was the enjoyment of the body. Though this was written about slavery in the 1800s, the idea that unrestricted joy and freedom expressed by Black people and people of color, it is inherently rebellious. That still rings true today. We can actively trace the spatial and temporal control of Black expression from slavery and colonialism through to today. This is why the act of joy is resistance. And as we use our physical bodies to protest, to march, to demand change, we must also use them to experience joy. The London protesters that we saw earlier in our reading underscored this point perfectly back in June 2020 with their moment of a spontaneously joyful movement, the electric slide. Pay attention to joy when you see it calling to you. Hold fast to the joy you have felt, you have found a way to access in your life whenever you are able to grab its tenuous, all-encompassing hold on your heart. As the essayist Sabrina Mark wrote this week, we are knee-deep in broken things. I wade through the kitchen and the news and our yard. The dryer is making a sound. The country is divided. Tree limbs are everywhere. How did the switch break off the lamp? I ask Eli, my 7-year-old. He shrugs. It's like a miracle, he says. From Sabrina Mark. And I say, our resilience is also the miracle. Over the next 5 weeks, we will explore all the qualities that creates the miracle that is us, making it through together. So hold on to joy. Open your door to joy. Let joy build your resistance and your resilience, so that when you are knee-deep in broken things, those shards of light scattered everywhere, you can still sing to yourself, I've got that joy, joy, joy down in my heart, and know it is true. May it be so.